Hey guys, tonight we're going to lie back under a velvet sky, the kind without city lights, where stars actually shimmer instead of hiding behind pollution and anxiety. Up there, nestled quietly between constellations you only sort of remember from science class, is a cluster of stars the ancient Greeks called Io. But this isn't just any star pattern. No, this one used to moo. In tonight's story, you'll trail behind a mythological cow who, brace yourself, wasn't always bovine. Her name was Io, and like far too many women in ancient myths, she accidentally caught the eye of a thunder-wielding, shape-shifting, extremely married sky god. So yes, there's drama. Yes, there's deception. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive a week in her sandals, let alone her hooves. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your current location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where, and when, you're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're out walking on a warm hillside, somewhere in what would eventually be called Greece, but the city-states haven't yet carved out their rivalries. There are no Parthenons or democracy just yet, just hills, goats, oracles muttering cryptically, and the occasional god wandering around pretending to be a swan or cloud. You tilt your head back and see it, a faint constellation, its lines vaguely suggesting a four-legged creature mid-stride. That's Io, they say. But no one really explains how she got there, or why she deserved such stellar real estate. So you do what any curious traveler in a myth does, you keep walking toward the story. The path leads through temples and towns with names lost to time. The smell of olive groves gives way to incense drifting from a stone sanctuary. Inside, a statue gleams dimly. It's Hera, queen of the gods, her eyes sharp and calculating, frozen in marble. You nod politely and keep moving. No sudden movements around Hera. You've heard stories. Soon, whispers fill the air. You catch Io's name for the first time. She's a priestess, they say, devoted to Hera, ironically, and beautiful enough to attract divine attention. Not the good kind. Back then, beauty was less a blessing and more a cosmic trapdoor. You don't audition to be in a myth, after all. Myths pick you, and usually right when your life's finally going well. Now, Io wasn't just admired by mortals. Zeus, the king of the gods and serial monogamy avoider, noticed her too. He, of the thunderbolts and impulse control issues, saw her praying in Hera's temple and thought, well, this complicates everything. Historians still argue whether this story was an early warning against unchecked power or simply one of many metaphors wrapped in mooing metaphysics. Either way, you can sense the atmosphere shifting. The sky thickens, thunderclouds roll in, and everything suddenly smells faintly of ozone and impending drama. Zeus does what Zeus always does, he transforms. Maybe into a mist, or a breeze, or something poetic and hard to sue in court. He descends upon Io in secret. And whether she resists, consents, or simply endures varies depending on which ancient poet you're consulting and how generous their wine supply was. What we do know: things don't stay secret for long when your wife is omniscient. Hera doesn't miss much. And a sudden fog rolling into her temple? That's not exactly subtle. So here you are, watching divine chess unfold. Zeus, the cheater. Hera, the hunter. Io, the pawn, but not for long. You press forward through the story, stepping carefully through timelines and symbolism. You hear murmurs of jealousy, of disguise, of fateful transformations. Somewhere in the distance, a cow moos, and you get the feeling it's not just a cow. Not yet. Meanwhile, the stars above continue to shimmer. Quiet, distant, patient. And somewhere among them, Io waits for you to learn how she ended up there. You walk further into the story, following the hoofprints that haven't yet formed. For now, Io is still herself, still a mortal priestess, still human. She's graceful in that effortless way Greek myth women always seem to be, which usually signals impending misfortune. And sure enough, misfortune is already circling like a lazy vulture overhead. Io serves at the temple of Hera, goddess of marriage, protector of wives, and inconveniently, the actual wife of Zeus. As a priestess, Io's duties are straightforward: keep the altars clean, tend the sacred fire, and definitely don't attract divine attention from anyone with a lightning bolt collection. Too late. Zeus is watching her. Not from Olympus, he prefers a more hands-on approach. Imagine the king of the gods leaning on a thundercloud like a creepy guy at a bar. You can almost hear him whispering, "Hey, so you come here often?" There's no handbook for how to reject a god. Even if Io sensed the danger, saying no to Zeus didn't usually work out well for the mortal party involved. Not everyone gets to pull an Odysseus and trick their way out of it with clever wordplay and divine loopholes. And Io isn't Odysseus. She's just trying to light the incense and avoid eye contact. Mainstream myth tells us Zeus disguises himself, this time, possibly as a mist. Not even a particularly interesting mist, mind you. Just fog. Which somehow makes it worse. Because you know what's harder to escape than a creepy guy. A creepy guy who turns into air and wraps around you. You pause here in the temple garden. The olive trees are swaying slightly. There's a sudden hush, like the weather's holding its breath. That's when Zeus makes his move. Now, poets have made an industry out of romanticizing these moments, describing divine encounters as gilded, magical, wrapped in moonlight and flute music. But you're standing here, and it mostly feels awkward. Mist clings to your tunic. A branch cracks. Somewhere in the sky, Hera is narrowing her eyes. Historians still argue whether this myth is an early morality tale, a symbolic explanation for natural events, or simply another way ancient cultures processed the tension between fate and free will. Regardless, it's about to get a lot more bovine. The clouds part, but not because Zeus is done. No, it's because Hera has arrived. She doesn't storm in. She never needs to. Hera's the type who knocks gently on the door after walking in. She knows something's up. You can feel her looking right at you, even though you're just the narrator's shadow in this story. Zeus panics. Because he may be all-powerful, but he is very bad at getting away with things. In a burst of pure improv energy, he turns to Io and, to hide her from Hera, transforms her into a cow. You blink. She's standing there, four-legged and utterly disoriented. A white heifer, still beautiful, but now with hooves and big, confused eyes. No moo yet. That comes later. You can tell. Zeus tries to play it off. Oh, this cow? Totally normal cow. Found her. Isn't she nice? Hera smiles the way you smile when someone lies badly about something you already know. She gently strokes the cow's nose and says something like, "Lovely creature. Mind if I keep her?" And Zeus, trapped by his own nonsense, nods. "Sure, take that cow." And just like that, Io, the woman, the priestess, the human being, is gifted like a party favor to a goddess. It would be funny if it weren't so mythologically depressing. Hera leads the cow away, her hand never leaving Io's back. She knows. She always knows. And now, she's going to make sure Zeus doesn't get her back. You follow them at a distance, the stars above just beginning to shimmer into their familiar shapes. But Io's not up there yet. For now, she's somewhere between priestess and prisoner, grazing on grass she can't taste, thinking thoughts no one can hear. And somewhere behind you, the mist starts to clear, but the story's only getting thicker. So here you are, drifting in the wake of a cow who used to be a girl who used to be a priestess. And you're not even halfway through the mess yet, because when Zeus gets involved, the drama is never a quick burst of thunder. It's a lingering storm that pretends to pass, then loops back for an encore. Hera has her prize, one newly transformed, questionably gift-wrapped heifer. But she's no fool. She doesn't just tether Io to a temple post and call it a day. No, she wants insurance. And what better insurance than a massive, slightly horrifying security guard with eyes literally everywhere? Meet Argus Panoptes. Panoptes means all-seeing, and he lives up to the name. 100 eyes. Not metaphorical ones. Actual blinking, rolling, uncomfortably moist eyes. Imagine the world's worst spa treatment meets a sentient surveillance system. That's Argus. You crouch behind a column as Hera assigns him the task. Watch the cow, she says. Don't let Zeus anywhere near her. And Argus, who has no clear hobbies besides vigilance, nods solemnly and sits beside Io like a nightmarish babysitter. Now, here's where things get oddly endearing. Despite his unsettling anatomy, Argus isn't cruel. He watches Io, sure, but he doesn't poke her or prod her or laugh at her tail. He just watches. Some say he even talks to her softly, tells her stories to pass the time. Maybe he sings. Maybe he hums lullabies in a gravelly voice. You can picture it, right? 100 eyelids slowly blinking in rhythm to a cow-themed bedtime story. Mainstream mythology paints Argus as a monster or henchman, but there's a fringe theory that he represents the constant, inescapable gaze of the gods, the feeling that someone's always watching, even when you're a cow. Historians still argue whether Argus was a symbol of divine loyalty, or just Hera's version of a particularly intense ring camera. Io, meanwhile, is spiraling. She's trapped in a body she didn't ask for, unable to speak, and under constant observation by a multi-eyed giant. That's a lot, even for Greek mythology. She tries to escape a few times, but cows aren't exactly parkour experts. Her hooves slip, and Argus is always there, silently repositioning himself like a very large, very awake chess piece. You sit under a fig tree nearby, watching this strange vigil unfold. The stars overhead seem less like distant lights now and more like silent spectators. Maybe they're learning the story the same way you are, slowly, reluctantly, fascinated in spite of themselves. Back on Olympus, Zeus is fuming. Not in a violent, thunderbolt-hurling way yet. More of a seething embarrassment. He's been outmaneuvered. His brilliant cow disguise didn't fool Hera for a second, and now Io's being guarded by the ancient equivalent of a walking CCTV tower. But Zeus isn't going to let a 100-eyed sleep-deprived babysitter stand in the way of his divine right to, well, be Zeus. He needs a plan. And that's when he calls in Hermes. You probably know Hermes as the messenger god, the guy with winged sandals and fast-talking charm. But tonight, he's playing a new role, cow extraction specialist. Zeus doesn't give him detailed instructions. Just a deal with it kind of vibe, which is honestly how most myths involving Hermes begin. So Hermes descends. He doesn't arrive in a blaze of light. That's not his style. No, he drifts in like a breeze, soft and unbothered, a musical note on the wind. He sees Argus. He sees the cow. And he starts planning something that involves exactly zero brute force. That's the thing about Hermes. He's clever, slippery, and often underestimated. He knows Argus can't be outmuscled. But outsmarted? That's another story. For now, though, Argus sits. Io munches grass with a tragic expression. Hermes hovers nearby, polishing a flute. It's the calm before the lullaby. And high above, the stars hold their breath, waiting for the trickster god to play his hand. You settle into the grass, just far enough away to watch Hermes work. He's not in a rush, he never is. That's part of the charm. While Zeus may thunder and Hera may scheme, Hermes simply strolls in like he's got all night, and lucky for you, he does. Hermes eyes Argus Panoptes, who's sitting like a statue, his 100 eyes blinking in uneven rhythm. Some are open, some closed, some somewhere in between, like a system rebooting in slow motion. But he's alert. That's the problem. His whole thing is not falling asleep. So Hermes tries the soft approach first. He hums. Nothing dramatic, just a low, lazy melody that wanders like a river. Argus doesn't move, but a few of his eyes squint, then relax again. You can tell he's listening, even if he pretends not to be. Next, Hermes adds the lyre. A few drifting notes, plucked with a practiced touch. He's not showing off. This isn't an amphitheater. It's just for one very overqualified security guard and one very unlucky cow. The music spirals out in slow waves, curling into the warm night air. You feel yourself swaying with it, The rhythm less like a tune and more like a lullaby your body understands before your mind does. Hermes starts telling a story. A boring one. The most boring story he can muster. Something about a nymph who turned into a shrub and spent 50 years learning to photosynthesize properly. Argus frowns slightly. 16 of his eyes are fully closed now. 3 more are blinking in slow motion. And Hermes keeps going. Here's the thing. Hermes is the god of many things, travelers, thieves, trickery. But he's also the god of boredom weaponized as strategy. He doesn't need violence when he has the ancient world's most effective bedtime story. Historians still argue whether this moment was meant as an allegory for wit over strength, or just a divine prank on an overworked babysitter. Either way, it's working. Hermes walks in slow circles around Argus, weaving melody and monotony together. He talks about the migratory habits of snails. He recites rock names alphabetically. You swear he's describing the history of ancient rope-making in real time. And then, with a yawn so vast it echoes across the hillside, Argus slumps forward. Every eye shuts. All 100. Hermes stops mid-sentence, tilts his head, and listens. Nothing but crickets. You feel the tension snap like a worn-out lyre string. It's over. Or at least, Argus's watch is. Hermes glances at the sleeping giant with a kind of professional pride. Then, with a sigh that's almost respectful, he pulls out a small blade and well, yes. This is the part where Argus doesn't wake up again. The myths usually skip the messy part, but we'll keep it soft focus. Hermes sends him off with as little fuss as possible. No thunderbolts. No screams. Just one final lullaby, ending in silence. Hera, as you can imagine, is not amused when she finds out. But she doesn't rage. She doesn't even shout. She simply gathers Argus's eyes, every last one, and places them on the tail feathers of her favorite bird, the peacock. And if you've ever looked closely at a peacock's tail, you'll see them there, still watching. It's her way of honoring him. Or maybe just making sure no one ever forgets what happens when someone crosses her. You're standing under one of those peacocks now, carved in stone above a temple door, and you swear the feathers are watching you too. Hera doesn't let things go. Especially not cows. So Io is free, but freedom is relative. She's still four-legged, still terrified, still haunted by buzzing things that feel an awful lot like guilt, or trauma, or just divine punishment in mosquito form. And Zeus? Zeus is pretending none of this is his fault. Classic. You follow Io down the hillside, her hooves clumsy but determined. She doesn't know where she's going yet. Only that she's not staying here. And far above, the stars shimmer a little brighter. Maybe in relief. Maybe in warning. You settle into the grass, just far enough away to watch Hermes work. He's not in a rush, he never is. That's part of the charm. While Zeus may thunder and Hera may scheme, Hermes simply strolls in like he's got all night, and lucky for you, he does. Hermes eyes Argus Panoptes, who's sitting like a statue, his 100 eyes blinking in uneven rhythm. Some are open, some closed, some somewhere in between, like a system rebooting in slow motion. But he's alert. That's the problem. His whole thing is not falling asleep. So Hermes tries the soft approach first. He hums. Nothing dramatic, just a low, lazy melody that wanders like a river. Argus doesn't move, but a few of his eyes squint, then relax again. You can tell he's listening, even if he pretends not to be. Next, Hermes adds the lyre. A few drifting notes, plucked with a practiced touch. He's not showing off. This isn't an amphitheater. It's just for one very overqualified security guard and one very unlucky cow. The music spirals out in slow waves, curling into the warm night air. You feel yourself swaying with it, the rhythm less like a tune and more like a lullaby your body understands before your mind does. Hermes starts telling a story. A boring one. The most boring story he can muster. Something about a nymph who turned into a shrub and spent 50 years learning to photosynthesize properly. Argus frowns slightly. 16 of his eyes are fully closed now. 3 more are blinking in slow motion. And Hermes keeps going. Here's the thing. Hermes is the god of many things: travelers, thieves, trickery. But he's also the god of boredom weaponized as strategy. He doesn't need violence when he has the ancient world's most effective bedtime story. Historians still argue whether this moment was meant as an allegory for wit over strength, or just a divine prank on an overworked babysitter. Either way, it's working. Hermes walks in slow circles around Argus, weaving melody and monotony together. He talks about the migratory habits of snails. He recites rock names alphabetically. You swear he's describing the history of ancient rope-making in real time. And then, with a yawn so vast it echoes across the hillside, Argus slumps forward. Every eye shuts. All 100. Hermes stops mid-sentence, tilts his head, and listens. Nothing but crickets. You feel the tension snap like a worn-out lyre string. It's over. Or at least, Argus's watch is. Hermes glances at the sleeping giant with a kind of professional pride. Then, with a sigh that's almost respectful, he pulls out a small blade and, well, yes. This is the part where Argus doesn't wake up again. The myths usually skip the messy part, but we'll keep it soft focus. Hermes sends him off with as little fuss as possible. No thunderbolts. No screams. Just one final lullaby, ending in silence. Hera, as you can imagine, is not amused when she finds out. But she doesn't rage. She doesn't even shout. She simply gathers Argus's eyes, every last one, and places them on the tail feathers of her favorite bird, the peacock. And if you've ever looked closely at a peacock's tail, you'll see them there, still watching. It's her way of honoring him. Or maybe just making sure no one ever forgets what happens when someone crosses her. You're standing under one of those peacocks now, carved in stone above a temple door, and you swear the feathers are watching you too. Hera doesn't let things go. Especially not cows. So Io is free, but freedom is relative. She's still four-legged, still terrified, still haunted by buzzing things that feel an awful lot like guilt, or trauma, or just divine punishment in mosquito form. And Zeus? Zeus is pretending none of this is his fault. Classic. You follow Io down the hillside, her hooves clumsy but determined. She doesn't know where she's going yet. Only that she's not staying here. And far above, the stars shimmer a little brighter. Maybe in relief. Maybe in warning. By now, the ground beneath Io's hooves has changed. The soil is drier, the trees more sparse, and the air carries the scent of unfamiliar spices and sunbaked stone. You're somewhere south of the Black Sea, though, of course, no one calls it that yet. Geography is still a loose suggestion, not a certainty. Io keeps moving. Her pace isn't frantic anymore. It's the tired, measured walk of someone who has stopped hoping for a rescue and started hoping simply for pause. She crosses ancient paths, forgotten mountain passes, and riverbeds long since dried. And behind her, always, that subtle, maddening buzz. The gadfly never sleeps. But neither, it seems, does she. You find yourself in Egypt. Not the Egypt of pyramids freshly built, but of temples still fragrant with myrrh and walls inscribed with prayers. The Nile snakes quietly beside you, its waters glinting like molten gold in the sun. Papyrus plants whisper in the breeze. You recognize none of the gods here, but they seem to recognize her. Priests in white linen robes catch sight of the cow, and their eyes go wide. Some kneel. Others follow. They don't call her Io, though. They call her Isis. You blink. Wait, Isis? Historians still argue whether the Greeks grafted Io's story onto the Egyptian goddess, or if the myths collided naturally, like rivers meeting in a delta. In one version, Io's suffering transforms her into Isis herself, the revered mother goddess of magic and wisdom. It's one of those mythic mergers that makes you wonder, are we watching a woman turn divine, or just watching cultures try to make sense of shared pain? The Egyptians built her a temple. Or perhaps they already had, and she merely wandered into it. Either way, she is sheltered now, if only briefly. The gadfly disappears, or is charmed into sleep by incense and chants. For the first time in what feels like lifetimes, Io rests. You sit with her in the temple courtyard. The stone is cool beneath your feet. A nearby priestess offers water in a carved alabaster bowl. Io drinks. She looks up, and for a moment, just a moment, you swear she recognizes herself. Not as a cow. Not as prey. But as something sacred. Something still whole beneath all the myth. She stays here for a while. Long enough for rumors to ripple up the Nile. Long enough for gods to take notice. Zeus hears. Of course he does. He's quieter now, more sheepish than stormy. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's boredom. More likely it's just timing. He senses that Hera's fury has cooled to a simmer. And so, he sends a message. Not thunder. Not lightning. Just an unspoken promise. It's over. You watch Io wake one morning, the sun rising golden through columns. She stretches, not like a cow. Like a woman. Her limbs are changing. Her hands return. Her voice rises like birdsong through the temple. The transformation is quiet. No fanfare. No celestial choir. Just the slow unwinding of a spell too cruel to last forever. She is human again. Her hair falls over her shoulders, tangled and wild. She touches her face, her skin, her arms. There are tears, but they don't come from fear anymore. They come from remembering what it's like to be. Around her, priests and priestesses stare in awe. You half expect them to fall down and worship. But they don't. They just watch. And Io, who might now be Isis, or just herself again, walks slowly to the river, her feet bare on the stone. She kneels. The Nile kisses her fingers. And you know, something is ending. But something else is just beginning. Because Io may be human again, but her journey's not over. Not quite. The Nile glides by with the lazy certainty of a god who doesn't need worship to feel important. You sit beneath a palm tree while Io, now restored, barefoot and blinking in disbelief, moves like someone relearning her body. Each step is cautious. Not because she fears turning back into a cow, but because after so long on four legs, two feels like a gamble. You'd think this is the happy ending. And in a modern story, maybe it would be. Girl meets God, girl gets turned into livestock, girl walks to Egypt, girl becomes semi-divine. The end. But this is mythology. Endings are never that neat. Io is free. Technically. But freedom, as you've come to realize, doesn't mean going back to the way things were. She can't return to the Temple of Hera, can't unsee the 100 eyes or unfeel the buzzing fly. And she certainly can't just hop a chariot back to Argos and say, "You'll never believe what happened." No, she stays. Egypt welcomes her, but not as a visitor. They embrace her as a symbol. Maybe even as a goddess. And it's here, in the warm hush of the Egyptian breeze, that another detail slips into the myth, quietly, almost shyly. Io is pregnant. By Zeus, of course. Because why not? Greek myths love a divine pregnancy twist. You start to wonder if it's a contractual clause. If transformed by Olympian, must also bear child. She feels it before she knows it, something coiled deep inside her, not unwelcome, but heavy with meaning. She's not alone anymore, not even when she walks the temple garden paths at dusk or watches ibis birds strut through the reeds. Historians still argue whether this pregnancy symbolizes fertility, renewal, or just the mythological necessity of lineage. But here, in the soft glow of torchlight, it feels simpler than that. It feels like continuation. Her child will be named Epiphas, born under Egyptian stars. He will go on to rule Egypt, at least, according to myth, and will trace his bloodline straight through the tangled web of Greek heroes and demigods to come. You sit beside Io as she rests beneath a fig tree, her hand gently curved over her belly. She doesn't speak, but she doesn't have to. You can feel the quiet resolve in her breath. She's endured the worst the gods could throw at her. Now, she will endure something else, motherhood. And if she's afraid, she hides it well. Time passes strangely in Egypt. Days roll by like lotus petals on the river. Io no longer flinches at shadows or jolts awake from nightmares. Even the memory of the gadfly starts to fade. She is still, at times, uncertain. but no longer broken. And the people around her begin to build legends. They say she walked all the way from the land of the Hellenes. That she was a sacred cow, sent by the gods. That she wept milk into the Nile and made the crops grow sweeter. Some say she was Isis all along, sent into disguise to test the faith of men. Others whisper that she'll return to the sky one day, that a woman who suffered so much cannot stay on earth forever. You lie back in the sand, letting the warmth soak into your skin. The stars are already twinkling, faint but watching. And you can't help but wonder, which one will be hers? Not yet. But soon. The night deepens, and you settle into the soft, rhythmic pulse of the Egyptian landscape. The sky overhead seems vast, endless, though perhaps not quite as endless as the journey Io has endured. You follow her gaze upward, watching the stars twinkle with quiet anticipation. You've been here long enough now to know that this land, with all its mysteries, doesn't always grant easy rest. And neither, it seems, will Io. In the distance, you hear a murmur of voices, low and slow, like ripples across a pond. It's as if the land itself is speaking, murmuring in the language of the gods. And perhaps it is. The ancient Egyptians always believed that the divine was hidden in the smallest things, the turning of the Nile's waters, the movement of the stars, the way a bird's wings flapped in the moonlight. Everything was alive with story. You don't know whether Io feels the weight of those stories, but you can tell she's come to understand her place in them. After all, she's not simply her. She's the cow who wandered through myth and time. She's the wandering queen, the silent witness to gods who loved her in twisted, painful ways. And now, she's carrying the weight of future generations in her belly. Her child will be born soon. The anticipation is like a hum that seems to vibrate the very air around you. Epiphus, Zeus's son, a child born not from the clean, smooth union of gods, but from a trail of turmoil, fear, and magic. Perhaps he'll be a king. Perhaps he'll change the course of history. Perhaps, like his mother, he will be a symbol of something larger than himself. As the days roll by, Io grows quieter, more still. The priests who have followed her from the temples whisper among themselves, offering sacrifices to ensure a safe birth. It's not unusual, of course, for a child of a god to require rituals of protection. But for some reason, they all seem strangely invested in Io's pregnancy, not only because of the divine parentage, but because she has become something else entirely. She's a goddess, yes, but she's also an idea, a personification of suffering, survival, and metamorphosis. One night the stars shift, a sign to the priests that Io's time is near. The Egyptian goddess in her, whether it's Isis or Hathor, or both, seems to glow brighter now. You can see it in the way she moves, the slight gleam of divinity returning to her eyes. The gods may have cast her into suffering, but they also prepared her for something greater than anything they could have foreseen. There's a ritual, of course. This is Egypt, after all. And rituals in Egypt are rarely quick or simple. They stretch over hours, if not days, filled with offerings of frankincense, the burning of precious oils, the chanting of prayers in a language you barely understand. Io, however, is calm throughout it all, as though she understands that these words, these strange, eternal incantations, are part of her story. The story she never asked for, but which will continue far beyond her lifetime. You can almost see the echoes of the future reflected in the smoke rising into the night sky. Her son will grow up with a connection to the gods, but more than that, he will also inherit her strength. He will inherit her knowledge of what it means to be both divine and mortal, to stand between worlds, uncertain of where one ends and the other begins. Historians still debate the legacy of Epiphus. Was he a great ruler of Egypt, or just another demigod whose story faded with time? Was he remembered for his mother's trials or for his own deeds? The evidence is vague, and most of it has been washed away by the tides of time, like so many other myths. But you can't help but feel the weight of his birth. The child of Io, the cow-turned goddess, is as much a product of pain as he is of divine favor. As the birth approaches, you feel something in the air shift, an almost imperceptible change. The birds stop their singing. The winds die down. The sun, which has burned hot and unforgiving, suddenly softens. You get the sense that even the land is holding its breath. The time for birth is always a turning point in mythology. A new chapter. A new reign. On the night Io gives birth to Epiphus, the sky breaks open in a silent storm of stars. You're not sure if it's divine intervention or just nature's odd way of marking important moments, but it feels significant. You sit by her side, watching her as she becomes more than a woman, more than a cow. She becomes the moment between two worlds, a point of connection where the divine touches the mortal. Her son is born under a blanket of stars, and as you watch the tiny life held in her arms, you understand, this isn't just the birth of a god. This is the birth of a new way of telling stories. And this story? It's far from over. The night after Epiphus is born, you're sitting outside the temple, the cool Egyptian air swirling around you as you watch the faint glow of the sky. The stars are brighter tonight, as if they, too, are paying tribute to the new life that has entered the world. Epiphus, the child of Zeus and Io, lies in the cradle of divine destiny, but you can't help but wonder, will his life be different from his mother's? Or is it written in the stars that he, too, will have to grapple with the whims of gods and the weight of ancient curses? Io, cradling her son, doesn't seem to be asking those questions. Instead, she watches him sleep with the quiet, almost reverent expression of someone who has weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, and now simply wishes for peace. She's already been to hell and back, and now, it seems, her purpose is clearer than ever, to protect her child and ensure that his story, too, takes root in the world. But peace, you quickly learn, is not a luxury that the gods afford easily. Even in Egypt, where the land is rich with magic and mystery, there are whispers of her child's fate. Some of them are hopeful, a divine child, a king in the making. Others are far less welcoming. There are always those who fear the union of gods and mortals, who view it as a dangerous mingling of realms. But, as always with mythology, these whispers only deepen the mythic tension surrounding Io and her son. Historians still debate whether Io ever really found peace in Egypt. Some claim she lived out her days as a revered mother goddess, surrounded by the adoration of her new followers. Others suggest that she left Egypt, seeking some far-off place of safety or perhaps just wanting to leave behind the pain of the past. But here, under the shadow of the pyramids, you can't help but believe that this was her moment of reprieve. She had endured what seemed to be the end of her story, and now, in the land of the gods, she had been given a new beginning. It's at this point that the true legacy of Io's transformation begins to take shape, not just as a woman who became a goddess, but as a symbol of the human condition. We are all, in a sense, caught between realms, the divine and the mortal, the mythic and the real. And Io's story is a reminder that the lines between these worlds are rarely as clear as we might like them to be. As time passes, Io's story becomes less about her transformation into a cow, or even her long, painful journey across the ancient world. It becomes about what she represents, a bridge between worlds. A mother who brought forth a child who would go on to be a king, and a woman who had suffered at the hands of the gods only to rise above it. But the legend of Epiphus doesn't end in Egypt. Far from it. As the child grows, you can see the seeds of greatness in him. He's a king in the making, but not just any king. He's the son of Zeus, and that carries a burden that no mortal can easily carry. But unlike his mother, who had been tossed from one god's whim to the next, Epiphus will carve his own destiny. He'll lead in his own way, for better or for worse, and like all figures born of myth, he'll leave an indelible mark on history. But the road to greatness isn't easy. You know that. Mythological heroes rarely get a simple pass. They endure trials, tests, and twists of fate. And so it will be for Epiphus, though his struggles won't be quite like his mother's. They'll be different, more aligned with the politics of gods and men, more in line with the pressures of kingship. But somewhere in the back of his mind, you have to think that he knows he's not like other kings. He carries the blood of a cow who was once a woman, who bore a child whose life would reshape a part of the ancient world. As he grows, you'll see his path diverge. Maybe he'll rule Egypt with wisdom and fairness. Or maybe his reign will be more tumultuous, weighed down by the pressure of being a demigod. Either way, he'll have inherited his mother's gift, the ability to endure, to survive, and maybe to forgive. But Io's legacy is deeper than just her son. It's in the ways her story has echoed across centuries, woven into the fabric of myths, so intertwined with the celestial sphere that even the stars might have a story to tell if they could speak. You sit with Io for one last moment, the night closing around you both. The land of Egypt hums with the slow rhythm of history, and though her story may have quieted, you sense that it's never truly finished. You can feel her presence in the stillness of the air and the flicker of the stars overhead. Perhaps, in the quiet moments before dawn, we all become something more than human. Maybe, like Io, we are transformed not by the actions of others, but by the way we carry our own stories, etched forever into the night sky. The first light of dawn filters through the towering columns of the temple, casting long shadows across the sacred land of Egypt. Io, cradling her son, is already awake, though the rest of the world sleeps. She gazes out over the desert, her thoughts distant, carried away by the sands of time. For a moment, it's easy to forget that she's not just a mother, not just a woman, but the figure of a myth whose legacy will stretch far beyond her own lifetime. As the sun rises higher, you're struck by the quiet majesty of her story. It's not the story of a great conqueror or a mighty king, but the story of a woman, one who was transformed by the gods, cast into trials, and yet found her own way to carve out a place in history. And in that, there is something deeply human, something that resonates with anyone who has ever faced adversity and fought to rise above it. Epiphas, now a toddler, laughs from the safety of his mother's arms, and for the first time in your journey through her myth, you witness the calmness that has come over Io. There is no longer the nervous tension that accompanied her transformation, no more restless fear that the gods might take her again. Perhaps she has finally made peace with her fate. Perhaps, for the first time in ages, she is content with where she is. But not all the gods are willing to let the past fade into memory. For though she has lived in Egypt for some time, the weight of her earlier life, the life before the gods, is still pressing in. Zeus's gift, though one of strength and endurance, was also one of constant change. Io has never fully shaken off the effects of her transformation. Her relationship with the gods is complex, woven through with love and resentment, sacrifice and power. As Epiphas grows, the whisper of his divine bloodline grows louder. He has inherited his mother's gift of survival, but he has also inherited something else, the ambition of the gods themselves. The Egyptians, ever the astute observers of the divine, begin to see him not just as the son of Io, but as something more, a child who could unite not just the Greek and Egyptian gods, but potentially even the mortal and divine realms. It's a dangerous thought to entertain, and as with most things in the world of the gods, it's a thought filled with as much promise as peril. Historians argue whether Epiphas was ever truly accepted by the Egyptians as their own ruler. Some say that he took the throne effortlessly, wielding his heritage with a grace that seemed unnatural for someone so young. Others claim that his rule was marked by strife, unrest among the gods, resistance from the Egyptian priests, and an overall reluctance to accept a king whose divine father wasn't one of their own. But for Io, her son's future is something she cannot control. She watches him grow with a mixture of pride and wariness. As much as she wants him to have a normal life, she knows that gods and kings don't get normal lives. They get destinies, grand and often tragic. And so, she continues to mother him, guiding him with the wisdom of a woman who has lived through the worst the world, and the gods, could throw at her. She whispers to him at night, recounting stories of the gods, of her own trials, of the metamorphosis that turned her from a woman to a cow and then to a goddess. She doesn't dwell on the pain, but there's a quiet understanding in her voice that her son will one day need to know these stories. For though he is a child of the gods, he is also her child, and it's in these moments that she feels the weight of what she must pass on to him. In the silence of her temple, Io becomes a teacher. The lessons she imparts to her son are more than just the history of their gods. They are the lessons of survival, of finding strength even in the most impossible of circumstances. She teaches him the resilience of the cow she once was, the calm that only comes after the storm. She teaches him that gods may grant you power, but it's your own choices that will define your fate. And somewhere in the distance, you can hear the faintest echo of her story, drifting on the wind, weaving its way into the legends of Egypt, Greece, and beyond. It's the story of a woman who was more than just a cow, more than just a victim of divine capriciousness. It's the story of a mother, a goddess, and a woman who had the power to transform even the most tragic circumstances into a legacy that would live on forever. As the sun reaches its zenith and the temple begins to come alive with the activity of the priests, you can't help but wonder how much of Io's life has shaped the world that followed. She may not have been the warrior queen, the heroic conqueror, but her story, her transformation, her motherhood, those things will ripple through history. And in a way, she will always be remembered as more than a symbol of suffering. She will be remembered as a symbol of transformation itself. You stand with Io one last time, watching the shadows stretch across the temple as the day turns to night once more. Her story, like all great myths, will endure. It will change with each telling, of course, but its core truth will never fade, that through suffering, transformation, and motherhood, something eternal can be created. The night wraps around you like a thick, comforting blanket. You and Io sit in the stillness, the faint murmur of the temple's activity a distant hum. The world is quiet, but the weight of history is heavy. You've traveled through time with her, felt her pain, her strength, her motherly resolve. You've witnessed how myths are not just stories but living, breathing entities, shifting with every retelling, evolving in the hands of those who carry them. And yet, Io's story is still unfolding. You glance at her, and for the first time, there is an unsettling silence between you. She has seen things that most could never even imagine, things that no mortal woman should have to endure. She's been chased by a god's fury, transformed into a beast, and carried across lands and seas to a foreign kingdom. Her son, Epiphus, is growing up in the shadow of divine blood and destiny, but it's clear that Io's own journey has never truly ended. As you sit together, you realize that her story isn't finished. In the world of myths, the end is often just another beginning. At this point, Io's transformation from a mortal to a goddess is complete. She is no longer the frightened girl who first caught Zeus's eye, no longer a cow wandering aimlessly in the wilderness. She's transcended that, becoming something larger than life. But this is also where her myth diverges from many others. Unlike other gods who enjoy their immortality without fear or doubt, Io's existence is filled with the questions of what it truly means to be a god. To hold the power of a deity and yet carry the scars of your mortal life. How can she reconcile the two parts of herself, her past as a mortal woman and her present as a goddess? Historians have long argued that Io's transformation was one of the most tragic in Greek mythology. Not because of her suffering alone, but because she was caught between two worlds, mortality and divinity, and could never fully embrace either. Some scholars contend that the gods were indifferent to her suffering, while others believe that her transformation was a cruel, deliberate punishment meant to remind mortals of their frailty and the capriciousness of divine power. But in the quiet of the desert, with only the stars overhead to witness, you can't help but think there's something more to her story, something the ancient texts don't fully capture. As Io's life continues in Egypt, you can almost hear the whispers of the gods around her. In Greek mythology, immortality is often the reward for those who prove themselves worthy, but Io's immortality came at a terrible cost. She was granted it as part of a divine intervention, a gift from Zeus, but it's not clear whether she ever truly accepted it. There's an unsettling ambiguity in the idea of a goddess who longs for peace, who seeks release from her transformation, but knows that she can never return to the life she once had. And yet, she persists. As her son grows into a young man, it becomes apparent that his future will be much different from hers. Where she was once a symbol of suffering, Epiphus will be a symbol of strength. But will his destiny be any less fraught? Can he truly escape the shadow of the gods that looms so large over his family's history? It's a question that has occupied scholars for centuries. Some believe that he will surpass his divine lineage and build a kingdom that is both strong and just, while others argue that his bloodline will doom him to the same tragic fate as many other mythological figures. But for Io, the only thing that matters is the present moment. For now, she is content. She watches as her son plays in the sand, his laughter echoing through the temple, and for once, she allows herself to imagine a future where she is not merely the tragic figure, the pawn in a cosmic game of power. She imagines a future where Epiphus, her son, rules with wisdom and grace. A future where the gods are no longer the sole arbiters of her fate. For now, though, her life is tied to the earth, to the land of Egypt, where she will forever be remembered as both a goddess and a mother. And it is in this quiet acceptance that Io finally finds her peace. But even peace cannot last forever, not in a world as turbulent as the one she inhabits. Historians still argue about whether Io was truly content in Egypt, or if she longed for something else, perhaps for the gods to grant her a different fate, or perhaps for a return to her mortal life. But whatever the truth, it's clear that her legacy is far from simple. It is not just the story of a woman who was punished by the gods, but of a woman who found her strength in adversity, who carried her pain with dignity, and who passed on her wisdom to the next generation. And so, as the evening falls and the desert cools, Io sits with you, watching the stars that seem to shine just for her. Her story, like the stars themselves, will continue to burn bright, echoing across time and space, carried by the winds of myth. You can almost hear her whisper, "I was more than just a cow. I was a woman, a mother, and a goddess." And in that moment, you realize that you're no longer just a spectator in her story. You've become part of it. Just as her legacy is immortalized in the constellations, so too will your connection to her tale linger on, a quiet witness to the enduring power of myth and transformation. The moon, high and luminous above the desert, casts its silver glow across the sprawling landscape. You sit beside Io, the vastness of Egypt surrounding you, and for a moment, you simply breathe. The air is cool, dry, filled with the whispering promise of eternity. You've wandered through Io's past, you've followed her journey from the Greek shores to the Egyptian sands, and now, you feel the weight of the myth settling around you like the night itself, heavy, timeless, and endless. But myths, like the stars, never stand still. They evolve. They change with each telling. And Io's story is no exception. In the stillness of the moment, you can almost feel the gods watching. In the distance, you hear the faint clamor of the temple priests, their voices rising in unison as they call out to the gods in their nightly prayers. The worship of the gods is as old as time itself, and though Io has found solace in Egypt, her story remains entwined with the divine. The gods have not forgotten her, nor will they ever. The myth of Io is far from over. What most people forget is that while Io's story was a tale of transformation, it's also a story of redemption. The gods, despite their cruelty, have a way of offering both punishment and grace in equal measure. In the end, it's how the mortal or divine character responds that matters most. Io's acceptance of her fate, her quiet strength, her ability to adapt, all of these traits have made her a figure of enduring myth. Yet, there's something uniquely fascinating about her relationship with the gods. Many gods, Zeus in particular, are often portrayed as distant, capricious, indifferent to the suffering they cause. But Io's story reveals another side to this divine realm. It's one that suggests that even the gods are not immune to guilt, remorse, or, in some cases, affection. You begin to realize that Io's transformation wasn't merely a punishment. It was an opportunity for the gods to learn something as well. Zeus, in particular, seems to be affected by his actions toward her. You wonder if, somewhere in the recesses of his divine mind, he ever regretted his treatment of Io. Historians, of course, have their own theories on this matter. Some believe that Zeus's interventions with Io were a kind of cosmic correction, an attempt to balance the power dynamics between gods and mortals. After all, if a mortal woman could survive such hardship and still carry on, what did that say about the gods' own sense of power? Others, however, argue that Zeus's actions were purely selfish. Perhaps he didn't feel remorse at all. After all, he was the king of the gods. His will was absolute. Yet, even in his absolute power, Zeus could not remove the curse of guilt that would shadow him after his involvement in Io's fate. Historians argue that his gift of immortality to Io, despite his initial cruelty, may have been his way of compensating for the pain he had caused her. It's a fascinating idea, one that paints Zeus not as a figure of unwavering strength, but as a god who, like all beings, is capable of making mistakes. As you contemplate this, you think back to the moment when Io was transformed, the shimmering light of the divine magic engulfing her. Her body, once human, became that of a cow, her limbs elongating and contorting in ways unimaginable to the mortal eye. But in that moment, when she stood, bewildered and powerless, you also remember the strange sense of liberation that followed. In her new form, Io was freed from the constraints of her human life. She was no longer a pawn in Zeus's game. She was something entirely new, something beyond the reach of ordinary mortals. And in Egypt, she had found her place. Though her transformation had been one of suffering, it had also been one of rebirth. The gods might have seen her as a victim, but to the Egyptians, Io was a divine being. A goddess. The myths would change, of course, but in this new land, in the heart of Egypt, she was no longer the frightened girl she once was. She was a woman who had triumphed over the very forces that sought to control her. Historians continue to debate whether or not Io ever truly found peace in Egypt. Some believe that she quietly accepted her fate, living out her days in the shadow of the gods. Others think that she may have spent her immortal years in contemplation, wondering what her true purpose was in the grand tapestry of the cosmos. Perhaps she still struggled with the question of whether her transformation was a blessing or a curse. But what is certain is that her life, and her story, had become something more than just a tale of suffering. It had become a legend. And legends, as we know, never fade away. They linger in the hearts and minds of those who tell them, passing down wisdom, even when the truth is lost to time. As the night deepens and the stars twinkle above, you realize that Io's legacy will always be one of transformation, but also of endurance. The world may move on, the myths may change, but the story of a woman who was more than just a cow will always remain. It will be whispered in the temples, sung in the streets, and remembered for generations to come. Perhaps that is the true power of the gods, not just their ability to shape the world, but their ability to shape the stories that define us. And in Io's story, we find not just a woman's suffering, but her triumph. A triumph that will echo through the ages. The silence is almost soothing now. You're comfortable, cocooned in the quiet rhythm of the desert night. Io's presence beside you is peaceful, she seems at ease, her features softened in the moonlight. It's strange, though, this calm. After all that she's endured, her story should have left a scar. And yet, there's a serenity in the way she exists now, a quiet acceptance that feels almost divine in itself. She gazes at the stars, her gaze far away, as if she's searching for something only she can see. It's not just the stars she's watching, though. You can almost sense the weight of the eons pressing down on her, the memories of her transformation lingering like ghosts of the past. The stars, those brilliant, timeless markers in the sky, are now her companions. Each twinkle, a reminder of her journey. Each constellation, perhaps a map of her life. There is one constellation that stands out, though, and Io is well aware of it. The constellation of Hera's cow, known in modern astronomy as the Milky Way, is believed to represent her. And though it is a part of her, it's also something that sets her apart. It's as if the gods themselves cannot let her go, forever linking her to the cosmos, forever forcing her to be more than just a mortal woman who suffered at their whims. It is as if her suffering itself had transcended time. Historians still argue about the exact origins of this myth, whether it was born from the Egyptians or the Greeks or perhaps both. Some suggest that the Milky Way, that glorious streak of light across the heavens, is the spilled milk from Hera's breast, which was cast into the sky by the gods in the wake of the transformation. Others contend that it is a more literal representation of Io herself, her very essence being immortalized in the heavens. Either way, the connection is unmistakable. Io was a woman who was elevated not just in myth but in the stars themselves. But how does one reconcile being immortalized in the stars, yet forever tied to the story of one's suffering? In a way, the constellation becomes both a gift and a curse. She was both a victim and a victor, but that distinction was hardly ever clear-cut. The gods' mercy was tempered with cruelty, and her immortality was granted as much out of their own guilt as it was out of their divine will. It's easy to imagine Io, with her celestial connection, reflecting on this paradox. To exist as a goddess in her own right, to be worshipped by the people of Egypt, but also to know that her origin story is one of pain, of powerlessness. Her very being is a mixture of love, rage, and divine manipulation, an eternal reminder of both her strength and her helplessness. But despite all of this, Io seems to be at peace. She has made her way through the labyrinth of divine politics, emerged on the other side as something more, yet forever intertwined with the gods who created her pain. And now, she is part of something even greater. She is an eternal figure in the night sky, a reminder of the fragility of mortality, and the never-ending cycles of transformation. Historians often debate whether the myth of Io was intended to reflect human suffering and divine retribution, or whether it was more of an allegory about the cyclical nature of life. After all, her story doesn't truly end. Her transformation may have been painful, but it ultimately led to a new chapter, one that included a son who would shape his own destiny and a place among the stars. There is something inherently hopeful about that. Even in the most painful transformations, something beautiful can emerge. And it's not just the stars that hold her story. Her legacy continues to live on in the stories told by those who remember her. The ancient Egyptians, with their reverence for the divine, saw her not as a victim but as a goddess who had earned her place among the immortals. The Greeks, too, eventually reconciled her story, seeing in her a tale of sacrifice, endurance, and redemption. And as her myth crossed borders and traveled through time, it became a symbol of the resilience of women, those who suffer yet rise again, those who are transformed but never truly broken. You sit beside her for a while, watching the stars together. The world feels small in comparison to the vastness above. There's a quiet peace in the way she has made sense of her journey, in the way she carries her story with grace. You think of all the gods and heroes whose stories have been retold over and over, their fates sealed by time. But Io, you realize, is different. Her myth doesn't belong to one culture, one people. It's not just a story of the Greeks, or the Egyptians, or even the gods. It's a story that transcends all boundaries, a story that belongs to all of us. As you sit in the warmth of the desert night, the silence feels less heavy than it did before. You've followed Io through her trials, her transformations, her divine interventions. And now you realize that this story, though it has passed through the hands of many, is hers to tell. She has found her place in the world, both in life and in the stars. She's not just a figure in a myth anymore. She is part of something greater, something eternal. She is the cow that became a goddess. The woman who became a constellation. It's funny how myths have a way of catching up with time. You're here now, beneath the same stars Io once gazed upon, and somehow, it feels like her story is timeless, an eternal presence in the world. She is, after all, part of the cosmic dance that governs both the heavens and the earth. There's something profoundly calming in that thought. A story that stretches across the ages, a legend that refuses to fade. As you sit quietly beside her, contemplating the vastness of the universe, you feel an almost serene connection to the past. The air is cool, and the sand beneath your feet feels softer now, as though it has settled into its own rhythm over the millennia. You imagine the gods watching from their celestial thrones, their eyes fixed not on the mortal world below, but on the constellations that carry their stories forward. You wonder if they, too, ever feel the weight of history, the weight of having their stories retold over and over. Do they ever feel the pull of nostalgia, the yearning for the days when they could still shape fate directly? But then you return to Io, still seated next to you, her form now more ethereal than human. The past seems so distant from here, yet she remains unchanged, timeless, and indelibly linked to her myth. The question that haunts many who study ancient myths is why these stories persist for so long. Why is it that Io's tale, despite its origins in a distant time, continues to captivate our imaginations? Perhaps it's because, at its core, it's not just about gods and goddesses. It's about transformation, about the ways in which lives, once marked by hardship, can take on new shapes, new meanings, and new powers. Historians argue that the persistence of myths like Io's may be because they touch on something universal. Transformations of all kinds, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, are part of the human experience. We all face challenges that seem insurmountable, forces beyond our control, and yet, the stories we tell about those challenges often become the ones we pass down through generations. They become a way to make sense of suffering, to find meaning in the inexplicable, and to believe that even the darkest moments can lead to growth, renewal, or, even better, transformation. Io, of course, never saw her transformation as an opportunity at first. She was a victim, cursed by the gods for a love that was not her own. Her story began in pain, and yet, as we've seen, it ended in something far more enduring: immortality. Perhaps it's the very nature of myth to take something seemingly negative and make it into something that, over time, will be remembered as beautiful or meaningful. Zeus's cruelty gave rise to Io's eventual divinity. And though it's difficult to reconcile the suffering she endured, it's equally hard to ignore the dignity she gained from it. Looking at Io now, in the present, she carries no bitterness. She does not rage against the gods or bemoan her fate. Her strength lies not in resistance, but in acceptance. In that sense, she is a symbol of the quiet power that exists in surrender. Sometimes, the greatest strength isn't in fighting back, but in finding peace within the situation we've been given. It's an insight that, in a way, transcends myth. You wonder if modern readers, in their quest for clarity and justice, sometimes overlook the subtle power of myths like Io's. In today's world, we seek answers, explanations, and closures. We want the narrative to be clear, the conflict resolved, and the ending definitive. But ancient myths weren't created for that purpose. They were created to comfort us with ambiguity, to present us with a cycle of life, death, and rebirth that doesn't always have easy answers. The gods' motives were often unclear, their actions a tangled web of divine whim and personal agendas. Yet, in this complexity, there's a truth that feels both unnerving and liberating. Life, much like mythology, is not always about neat resolutions. It's about finding meaning and peace amidst the uncertainty. Io's transformation, her journey from mortal to goddess, mirrors this principle. It doesn't offer tidy conclusions. We never know exactly how she felt about her fate, whether she accepted it willingly or with sorrow. But in her immortality, in her place among the stars, we do see a kind of peace, a quiet recognition that even the gods themselves must learn to reconcile the past with the future. And perhaps that is the true essence of mythology. It doesn't offer us certainty. It invites us to live with the unknown, to embrace it, and to make sense of it in our own way. At this point in her story, Io is no longer the terrified girl she once was. She is more than the cow-turned-goddess. Her legacy is not bound to the cruelty she faced but to the quiet perseverance with which she carried on. She is an emblem of endurance, of transformation, and of acceptance. And as you sit beside her, watching the endless sky above, you realize that her myth, despite its origin in ancient Greece and Egypt, still speaks to us today. It speaks to the ways in which we all must navigate our own transformations, both the ones we choose and the ones forced upon us. Historians still debate the precise meanings of her myth. Some argue that it represents the innocence lost in the face of divine intervention, while others suggest it's a commentary on the ways in which power and suffering are often linked. But perhaps the true significance of Io's story isn't in the answer at all. Maybe the question itself, how she became a cow, how she endured her suffering, and how she transformed, will remain a mystery forever. As the night stretches on, you can almost hear the whispers of those who've told her story before. Their voices seem to carry on the wind, their words as ancient as the stars themselves. You feel a gentle nudge, as though Io herself is quietly reminding you that this journey is far from over. Her story, like the constellations, will continue to shift, to evolve, and to inspire those who come after. And in the end, her transformation, her eternal presence in the sky, is not a punishment, but a symbol. A symbol of hope, of resilience, and of the enduring power of myths. It's funny how myths have a way of catching up with time. You're here now, beneath the same stars Io once gazed upon, and somehow, it feels like her story is timeless, an eternal presence in the world. She is, after all, part of the cosmic dance that governs both the heavens and the earth. There's something profoundly calming in that thought. A story that stretches across the ages, a legend that refuses to fade. As you sit quietly beside her, contemplating the vastness of the universe, you feel an almost serene connection to the past. The air is cool, and the sand beneath your feet feels softer now, as though it has settled into its own rhythm over the millennia. You imagine the gods watching from their celestial thrones, their eyes fixed not on the mortal world below, but on the constellations that carry their stories forward. You wonder if they, too, ever feel the weight of history, the weight of having their stories retold over and over. Do they ever feel the pull of nostalgia, the yearning for the days when they could still shape fate directly? But then you return to Io, still seated next to you, her form now more ethereal than human. The past seems so distant from here, yet she remains unchanged, timeless, and indelibly linked to her myth. The question that haunts many who study ancient myths is why these stories persist for so long. Why is it that Io's tale, despite its origins in a distant time, continues to captivate our imaginations? Perhaps it's because, at its core, it's not just about gods and goddesses. It's about transformation, about the ways in which lives, once marked by hardship, can take on new shapes, new meanings, and new powers. Historians argue that the persistence of myths like Io's may be because they touch on something universal. Transformations of all kinds, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, are part of the human experience. We all face challenges that seem insurmountable, forces beyond our control, and yet, the stories we tell about those challenges often become the ones we pass down through generations. They become a way to make sense of suffering, to find meaning in the inexplicable, and to believe that even the darkest moments can lead to growth, renewal, or, even better, transformation. Io, of course, never saw her transformation as an opportunity at first. She was a victim, cursed by the gods for a love that was not her own. Her story began in pain, and yet, as we've seen, it ended in something far more enduring, immortality. Perhaps it's the very nature of myth to take something seemingly negative and make it into something that, over time, will be remembered as beautiful or meaningful. Zeus's cruelty gave rise to Io's eventual divinity. And though it's difficult to reconcile the suffering she endured, it's equally hard to ignore the dignity she gained from it. Looking at Io now, in the present, she carries no bitterness. She does not rage against the gods or bemoan her fate. Her strength lies not in resistance, but in acceptance. In that sense, she is a symbol of the quiet power that exists in surrender. Sometimes, the greatest strength isn't in fighting back, but in finding peace within the situation we've been given. It's an insight that, in a way, transcends myth. You wonder if modern readers, in their quest for clarity and justice, sometimes overlook the subtle power of myths like Io's. In today's world, we seek answers, explanations, and closures. We want the narrative to be clear, the conflict resolved, and the ending definitive. But ancient myths weren't created for that purpose. They were created to comfort us with ambiguity, to present us with a cycle of life, death, and rebirth that doesn't always have easy answers. The gods' motives were often unclear, their actions a tangled web of divine whim and personal agendas. Yet, in this complexity, there's a truth that feels both unnerving and liberating. Life, much like mythology, is not always about neat resolutions. It's about finding meaning and peace amidst the uncertainty. Io's transformation, her journey from mortal to goddess, mirrors this principle. It doesn't offer tidy conclusions. We never know exactly how she felt about her fate, whether she accepted it willingly or with sorrow. But in her immortality, in her place among the stars, we do see a kind of peace, a quiet recognition that even the gods themselves must learn to reconcile the past with the future. And perhaps that is the true essence of mythology. It doesn't offer us certainty. It invites us to live with the unknown, to embrace it, and to make sense of it in our own way. At this point in her story, Io is no longer the terrified girl she once was. She is more than the cow-turned-goddess. Her legacy is not bound to the cruelty she faced but to the quiet perseverance with which she carried on. She is an emblem of endurance, of transformation, and of acceptance. And as you sit beside her, watching the endless sky above, you realize that her myth, despite its origin in ancient Greece and Egypt, still speaks to us today. It speaks to the ways in which we all must navigate our own transformations, both the ones we choose and the ones forced upon us. Historians still debate the precise meanings of her myth. Some argue that it represents the innocence lost in the face of divine intervention, while others suggest it's a commentary on the ways in which power and suffering are often linked. But perhaps the true significance of Io's story isn't in the answer at all. Maybe the question itself, how she became a cow, how she endured her suffering, and how she transformed, will remain a mystery forever. As the night stretches on, you can almost hear the whispers of those who've told her story before. Their voices seem to carry on the wind, their words as ancient as the stars themselves. You feel a gentle nudge, as though Io herself is quietly reminding you that this journey is far from over. Her story, like the constellations, will continue to shift, to evolve, and to inspire those who come after. And in the end, her transformation, her eternal presence in the sky, is not a punishment, but a symbol. A symbol of hope, of resilience, and of the enduring power of myths.